Good morning. My name is Dr. Larry Force, and I am a professor of psychology at Mount St. Mary College and director with Dr. Jeffrey Kahana. We're directors of our Center on Aging and Disability Policy. Every Wednesday, as you know, we come together for a discussion which we're calling ProActive Caring School Exchange. And it's with Lisa Nathan as parent, advocate, and meditator, and Peggy Pisano as school psychologist and advocate. We initially started this and we thought we were just going to go through April. And the next thing you know, with the reconfigurations of schools, we decided and committed to go to the end of the school year. This program, Proactive Caring Program, it is a project that is now, we're in our third year, funded by the New York State Developmental Disability Planning Council. And the intent is to be able to go out and contact and reach and train families regarding mindfulness-based stress reduction, family with children with disabilities. The first year we were doing small groups, and that was coordinated by Elaine Sproat. Then we start to go out to do train the trainer, and then COVID happens. And in conversation with Peggy and Lisa, I said, how is it, what do you think, how can we be present for families when we can't, assemble people? And what we created was something that really, really took off. And it's really to the credit of Peggy Pisano and Lisa Nathan. In June, we decided to change the format a little bit. In June, we have exciting news. Our e-resource book will be launched, and our specific Proactive Caring Program website will be launched. And we wanted to change the format, and we wanted to bring in people that have had the lived experience from the educational side as well. We've heard a lot about the concerns of children, the concerns of parents, the concerns of caregivers, the concerns of agencies, but we really haven't had the voice of the teacher, both the experienced teacher and the teacher that is in the moment right now dealing with this COVID concern. So in speaking with Lisa and Peggy, I said we need to identify somebody, and without a moment of hesitation, Lisa said, I know Cathy Hallock, and I want to go out and talk to her. And the next thing you know, we're all talking to Cathy Hallock. So Lisa, what I'd like to do is, because the theme of today is really the mindful behavioral connection where it merges and we get to awareness, in the moment. And as Cathy, we've talked offline, the thinking is, how can we be present for families as they're going through this, and as they're also coming into the uncharted territory of summer without a lot of the supports that they've typically had. So Lisa, if you could introduce Cathy and also talk about the connection and why you thought that Cathy would be a wonderful voice at the table.
Okay, sure. Hi, everybody. So, as you know, my son, Gabriel, he's 19 now and diagnosed with autism and intellectual disabilities, but also with an extraordinary sense of humor. Cathy was his teacher for a few years at his program. And I think why I thought first about Cathy, Cathy is an extraordinary teacher. She leads with love, with respect for the children. And, and we've spoken about this, Gabriel was very, very difficult to understand. And many teachers, many professionals really did not understand his abilities. And he's it's very difficult to understand him. And he has very poor expressive abilities, but incredible receptive abilities, receptive language. He understands everything, but it's very difficult for him to express himself. But Cathy and him, immediately, she got him. She takes the time, and one thing she said, which I think is really amazing, when she first gets a child in her classroom, she doesn't read other reports. She takes the child at face value, what she sees. She takes the time from her perspective, from her point of view, to really see who this child is in front of her and go from there, not from preconceived notions by a previous evaluation. So I think that's extraordinary, and I think that should be across the board, even in neurotypical kids. Not to bring your own preconceived notions to what a child might be or what they're capable of. So that's why I thought of Cathy. And, she and Gabriel just had an incredible bond. And I know she's just, 36-year educational veteran. and she's seen it all. And, so she's a golden resource. She's an incredible resource. And that's where our connection is.
So, Cathy, welcome. I'm going to ask you if you can unmute yourself.
I've been unmuted.
Lisa, what a tremendous, heartfelt introduction. As we talked about again last night in preparing for this, we talked about the fact that I would take the role of the moderator, and Lisa and Peggy would be the facilitator. Peggy from the behavioral side, Lisa from the meditative side. But I think that, one of the things that I was struck by before we even get into the content, I was struck by your sense of humor and your spirit. And I think that that's probably something that has, been able to be a real foundation for you in your professional career. So maybe, maybe you could talk a little bit about what Lisa referenced, because one of the things that you clearly said is, look, I'm not distracted by the reports of others. I want to take the child where they are and inform my own, and then I'll read those things, but I want to have my own impression. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, when I first started teaching, you read everything. You want to know everything. And then I would meet this kid and I'd think, I don't know. I don't see that same thing. And I tend to be very silly. You're right. I am humorous. And I use that in my teaching. And so I get a different aspect sometimes from a kid that maybe wasn't relaxed before, or was feeling more stressed. I don't use a schedule, which is now taboo, but at that time, I would just give the kid a to-do list. And we could work. So if he gets frustrated with math, so what? I'd say don't put a mark next to it. We'll go back to it. Let's do reading. And I think that's an important skill. When I get frustrated, I walk away, do something else, and come back. But it's not built into the system that way. It's built math from 10 to 10:30, whatever. And I think that being silly and adding an extra joke or doing something really relaxes the kids, so I get to see who they really are.
Lisa had mentioned that you were in the field for 36 years.
That's correct.
So I'm sure that over the course of time, you saw a lot of changes.
Oh, yeah.
Regulatory oversight, standardized testing, the whole bit.
Right.
So there's two questions here. We have teachers that are graduating college and now coming into the field. And the audience we have here are parents, agency people, teachers that are coming in. What would your guidance be in helping them adapt to this now ever-changing world?
Don't sweat the small stuff. The kid that sits in the back and flaps his hands, it's not a big deal. And a lot of teachers will be like, Billy, you got to sit still. Well, then Billy is focused on sitting still, not focused on what's going on in the room. So little silly things like that tend to annoy us or be distracting, they really don't matter. Take a moment to be silly if somebody's stressed. There's a great video clip it's about a minute and a half. And people say, you show your kid a video clip? I said, yeah, because that minute and a half bought me an hour and a half of good mood. It's a cat that pretends to play dead. And the kids get hysterical. Okay, it took a minute and a half. It took that pressure down in the room. I can introduce something new, and they're not feeling that stressed because they're still thinking about the silly cat and whatever, and they're still in that silly mood. So I tend to use humor and those kinds of things to my advantage. So I would think that if that works for you, yeah, great. Sometimes it's important to throw the schedule out the window momentarily and then get back on it.
And then bring it back. I think, when you're talking, it reminded me, there's a classic study in social psychology called the Pygmalion study. And they tested these kids like in 3rd or 4th grade, and they ended up standard IQ test. And then when the kids come into the next grade, they give the teachers the numbers. Right. But in fact, they weren't the IQ numbers, they were locker numbers. So the kid that scored high on an IQ test ended up getting a low locker number. The kid that scored low was able to get a higher locker number. And then they evaluated the kids. And the interesting thing is the kids with the higher locker numbers, but yet the lower scores on standardized tests were doing better because of the expectation of the teacher.
Well, I'm not big on scores. I hope that's not insulting to anybody, but I've had kids with scores of 50 who could do all kinds of things. And I've had kids with scores of 78 who couldn't find their way into the room and put their coat away. So, those numbers they have value in terms of getting funding and labeling and all that kind of stuff. But for me, Cathy Hallock, no, I don't really care what your number is. So, and it's a lot has to do with how they grew up and where their experiences were. They might not do well on that test because they're not familiar with it. So.
And the question that I gave you was really for the new teacher. Now the question is for the seasoned teacher. So somebody because you were there. Okay, you were 20, 22, 23 years into your career. All these changes are occurring. They're wearing you down with regulation. What would be the recommendation? And then we'll talk the direct recommendations and support for parents. But what would be the recommendation for the teacher that's midway through their career, that's not going to leave for a variety of reasons, but is just being pounded with and worn down with this regulatory oversight or new protocols? How did you survive that?
I'll tell you, I was angry with it. Even when they first started changing IEPs to computerized, because I don't feel like they're IEPs anymore, they're just EPs. There's no individuality in it. It's not that I looked at the kid and saw where he needs to go. I had to pick from a list. And to be very frank with you, I picked from the list and I aimed in that direction, but I worked in a lot of the other stuff that I felt was more important, like being able to socialize, being able to be independent, and that's not in the IEP. That's not on the paperwork. The paperwork has math, reading, blah, blah, blah. Well, they're very important, but can he go to ShopRite and find the cereal aisle? These are important. So I would kind of try and combine the two in my own weird sort of way. And that's how I got through it. I had to be creative.
Lisa, and I think that the creativity is the thing that really kept you alive, as far as spirit and being able to, because we've all been in that. We've been in positions for a period of time, and all of a sudden, you have to figure out a new way to rejuvenate yourself or reconfigure or recreate. In this COVID-19, we have friends. One friend in particular works for a large testing company now, but she spent 13 or 14 years in the classroom prior to that. And now she's not traveling. Now she's home because of the fact that COVID, has closed down school districts. And she's an experienced teacher with 3 kids. And she's like calling us and saying, oh my God, because now it's a new world with this, Zoom technology and the interactive stuff. I mean, and Lisa and Peggy, I'd like you to get involved in this discussion here as well. That, Lisa, both in the call when we talked about the planning for this and in listening to the discussion that you had this morning with Cathy, Cathy brings back a lot of fond memories for you, with her style. So,
yes,
so maybe if you could talk about what Cathy's saying, and you and Peggy, about how it can be translated into, good recommendations now for the parent and the agencies that are addressing the reality.
I think one of the things is to let go of expectations. It's when you're sitting with your child, if you're working with them and teaching them, do you want to go from that perspective?
Sure.
Sure. I think a lot of us operate from preconceived notions, what we think should be happening, what we think should be. And it's really important, even with our own children, to say, you know, let's see where we are right now and go from where we are, and let's play around and see what we can find. I mean, with Gabriel, he loves news stories. He likes to read news stories, right? So that's what I'm spending more time doing. I figure, you know what? He's going to get something from it. I'm not worried. Like the math stuff, it's like torture. And I'm thinking, like, what is he getting out of this? If I have to lead him so far to get to the answer, then what's the point? Let's take it back. Let's draw it back, and let's just, you know, get it so where he's not frustrated and I'm not frustrated, and let's focus on what he's really enjoying, and then it will work itself out. It's not the end of the world because he's not doing his so much math work.
So those are the words, and they're very powerful and direct words. What about the practice? Here you have a parent that is the practice that you bring to the table. This idea of the meditative thing, the idea of stopping and exhaling, and, you know, and not be, you know, swept away by the design that is Cathy. I love Cathy's statement. I mean, yeah, there's and Peggy will address this, the role of the standardized test, but also the application of it. I mean, the fact is that I was thinking as you were talking, you know, we have put together this school exchange with the presence. The whole proactive caring program is the presence and the voice of the parent and the practitioner standing next to each other, which you and Peggy have done a noble job. And now we've expanded it and brought the voice of the person, the other person involved in this, which is the teacher. You know, we've been talking about the teacher, but now here Cathy is standing here, you know, really giving voice to it. So what about, before Peggy, you know, I asked Peggy to comment on this, what about the practice of it? So you are being frustrated, you are getting these low scores, you are, you know, you have some teachers that are, so, you know, what would be a realistic practice for the parent to do when those types of things are coming in?
You mean as far as the frustration?
Yeah, and I'm really looking from Lisa's side about as a meditator. You know, you've been in that. You've been the recipient. Not every teacher in your life has been Cathy. Sure. So the fact is that, so that being said, that there are times that somebody's giving you something that you don't want to hear, or you don't want to believe, or you don't think there's a value to it, and you're kind of like getting swept into that whole thing and the frustration. What would you recommend to parents when they're going through that about how just to step back?
I think it's also important to focus on one point. I think we can get overwhelmed very quickly when, especially if we're frustrated, we tend, I think as humans, we tend to bring in, once we start getting frustration, it's like glue to many other things that are frustrating in our life. And then we tend to get overwhelmed. So I think it would be good to just focus on one thing. If you don't like, maybe there was a particular thing about disciplining your child, or there was a particular point, whatever is going on, I think we need to just focus on that and be able to communicate with the teacher what that specific thing is. I don't know if I'm making myself clear.
You are making yourself clear. I mean, I think the idea of on that one point, but what I'd like you to do is really drill down for the parent about from your meditative perspective. I mean, when you and I first started to talk, you said, look, I'm pretty sharp. I go prepared to these IEP meetings. I open up the door and I lose every thought I had because of the fact that I'm walking in. Then we bring Peggy and Peggy's perspective to the table. And one of the things that we talked about is, wouldn't it be wonderful if every IEP process started with a moment of meditation? Okay,
so let's set up a scenario.
Please.
Okay, so and I'm asking for assistance here. So what's the scenario that then I can address? Because I think it's too general right now. I think it's too vague. So is there a situation with the teacher and the child in the classroom? Is it a disagreement on best practice? Is it
Let me as you're framing that out, Peggy, maybe you could talk specifically without going into the detail of it, but talk about some of the scenarios that have come to your office about the fact that you have a child in a classroom, a teacher, a parent. There's a lot of moving parts in that. Maybe you could frame out like a scenario.
So I just want to kind of go back to one thing that Cathy said about frustration. And I think frustration we've discussed over the course of these last few weeks. But one of the things that you said, Cathy, was that when someone's frustrated, be it the teacher, the parent, or the child, that humor works to sort of everyone's advantage. And I think that that kind of situation is what you're talking about now, even that if the child at home is frustrated or the parent is frustrated with the educational information that the child has to participate in, that taking that break, taking that moment, relaxing, maybe doing something different, something that's enjoyable or humorous even, that alleviates pressure from lots of people. So I just wanted to kind of make that point.
Okay,
when I was in schools, there were often frustrations between the academic requirements, and I was in a high school, so the academic high school requirements for children who had disabilities who were sort of betwixt and between. And what I mean by that is that, some of those children were working towards a traditional local/regents diploma. However, some of their skill deficits made that a very frustrating experience. And so I think, Cathy, I want to go back to, again, I think you're talking about functional skills. And I think, Lisa, you sort of hit the nail on the head. If Gabe can't work on his math skills right now or for the foreseeable future, that participating in the things that he likes to do, like reading, will give him information about the world and knowledge. And that's, what we're in the pursuit of is sort of knowledge. So, is Gabe ever going to be a mathematician? Maybe not. He's not going to be a math teacher, probably. He's not going to be an actuary. However, there are skills that he can learn by reading and doing the things that he likes to do that may help him in the future. And so I think that's the kind of thing that special education teachers do. They look at the curriculum, they look at the future of where that student hopefully is going and try to adapt and make those things sort of mesh. And that's a difficult strategy and skill, especially for those kids or students that are kind of, as I said, working towards a traditional/local diploma, because there are requirements from the state, which I think is what you were referring to, Cathy, as the frustrating things that people require of students that they don't know and they don't understand and they aren't familiar with. Unfortunately, I guess there are some standards that we all have to have, and in order to meet that, local/regents diploma standard, you have to master certain things. But in my way of thinking, and I always sort of came up against this in my career, was where is that child going, and let's work towards where they're going, whether it's a diploma or not, but to help them have a more functional, rewarding life. So oftentimes I remember a student that I had who had significant deficits, but he had great rote memory. So he could memorize all kinds of facts and things, but when it came to applying those things, especially in a traditional classroom kind of situation, he had a lot of difficulty, and eventually his mother took him out of school and homeschooled him. And it probably wasn't until she actually did her own educational program with him that she realized that those skills were absolutely important, but to get that traditional diploma, it just wasn't going to work. And she did come back a couple of years later and say, I know you guys tried to direct me, but I couldn't hear it at the time, but I see it now because she did her own education. And I think that's what's happening with parents today in this COVID virus world. It's easier, shall we say, for your student to go somewhere and get the bulk of their education for the most part during the day. And that's for average students or students with disabilities. And now all of that's coming home. And so it's hard. I think people are learning about who their children really are. And again, I'm not just speaking about children with disabilities. They're learning about their strengths and weaknesses versus, the teacher writing a note saying, Johnny couldn't do his math today. Now we're actually doing the math. So we get to see firsthand what that feels like and what that child actually can accomplish. And that's a difficult task. It's a difficult task for people who are trained to do that sort of thing, like Cathy. And it's certainly difficult for parents who that's not their training. That's not what they do. So,
as you were talking, something that came to mind, and then Cathy, I'd like you to comment on this, that, we look for this synergy between parent and teacher and administrative, school psychology, school social work, because you're hearing different stories from different perspectives. And I think that the one thing that I really liked that Cathy talked about is that I remember working for the state in an institution and then in a community-based group home. And one of the things that we used to talk about, which was somewhat of a paradox, is the expectation is that somebody that lived in that group home should always be happy and always be busy. Well, guess what? We're not always happy. We're not always busy. Peggy referenced about Gabe and the mathematician. The fact is, yeah, he may not be a mathematician. Guess what? I'm not going to be a mathematician. But it's not a deficit, it's a choice. Gabe may not be a mathematician because that's really his choice. That's not his interest. But yet we come in collectively with this microscope that, if he's not doing this, then maybe he doesn't want to do it. Maybe he just wants a kickback. No, and I'm not just talking about Gabe, but in the group home, maybe the person doesn't. I come home, I'm not productive every waking moment of the day. So Cathy, maybe you could just talk about the realistic picture, because I think that's the thing that I was so taken by. And I loved what you said, because there's theories in the field of psychology that we're in, that talk about don't be distracted by a diagnosis, because a diagnosis can suck you into expectation. So Cathy?
Something Lisa said about, working with Gabe and how he gets frustrated with math and that kind of thing. And it happens with myself, with the computer sometimes, or with something else. But the thing that I used to try to do, and maybe this is helpful to parents and other people, is okay, if Gabe likes stories, he likes reading. He used to love, I had the kids bring in a news article once a week. And I don't care what it's about. It could be an advertisement. I really don't care. I just want them to have talked about it with their parents or whatever, and just be more aware of their surroundings and whatever, and then to be able to express something about it. But you can work that into your math. In other words, he brought an article one time that was about a parrot that had gotten lost and was adopted by somebody who spoke Spanish. And then the parrot found its way home several years later, but didn't repeat English anymore. It only repeated Spanish. And he thought that was great. So when I did math that day, we were cutting up, parrot feathers. And I'd be like, okay, so how many more you think we need? Whatever. I mean, you got to be able to work it into, and he laughed all the way through that math lesson because he kept remembering about the parrot speaking Spanish. If I could speak Spanish, it would have been even better, but so sometimes you can get stuff in to one activity. And if you look at a lot of activities, paper math sucks. I'm sorry for the language, but it has no meaning. Math 5 + 3 has absolutely no meaning until you put cookies on the table. Now 5 + 3 has a lot of meaning. So bringing meaning to those kinds of things, I think is a good thing for parents and for kids. I mean, if you're doing math, Lisa, and he's doing, let's say, addition, yeah, well, like bring that into it. If it's big math, like 3 digits or 2 digits, and you say, well, it's going to be 33 minutes till such and such is on TV. You know, how much of an hour is that? And then subtract it or whatever. So, and it's just real casual. You don't have to do 50 different examples of it. It's one thing. You throw it into the conversation. Then it has purpose. Once something has purpose, then you can develop more interest in it. If it has no purpose, you're just memorizing. It doesn't mean anything. So from my perspective, meaning is really where it's at. You got to get to the meaning before you can really teach somebody something.
Well, I can clearly see why Lisa immediately thought of you to have this conversation with. I'm not kidding you about that. And this whole idea of meaning and purpose. I mean, not only is it in the academic arena, but it's throughout our entire life.
Well, it happens to you, no?
Absolutely.
I mean, I do sign language. If I try and teach you something just by signing and you're not understanding it, your attention level goes right out the window. It's interesting for about 40 seconds. After that, it's a goner, you know, because you don't understand it.
Well, look, we wanted to implement this type of format of bringing somebody in with the lived experience, and you were the first person to do that, and really, it was wonderful. You really did you hit it out of the park here. You really did a great job. So before
Cathy,
go ahead.
I'm sorry.
No.
Cathy, can you just maybe offer parents some suggestions for, you know, they're home. Now there's no summer school for those parents who often sent their children to summer school. So, you know, there was that 2-week break, and then there was a 6-week summer program that's also not going to occur this summer for children with disabilities. So can you just briefly talk about some of the things that you might suggest? And I think you've already hit on some of those. For example, if you're teaching math, you know, let's have 5 cookies or let's have 8 cookies and put them out on the table and see who wants which pile. But other things that, you know, they can use throughout their day, perhaps, that might support that educational process, so that we're not looking at significant regression, which is the problem as to why most students with disabilities wind up in a summer program. So, you know, I'm sure teachers, people and parents and guardians are most concerned about that now.
Right. I think application of the skills that they have in a very everyday environment is going to help those skills stay at that level. So, you know, taking a child shopping at ShopRite is probably the most educational thing that you do every single week. You know, he's got to handle money. He's got to find products. He's got to, depending on what level the child's at, some kids are going to be reading ingredients and saying, wait a minute, I can't pronounce that. Well, if you can't pronounce it, you probably shouldn't eat it. Let's find one that doesn't have that in it, you know. So things like that, for kids who do higher levels of things, you know, figuring out what your budget is before you go. Collecting coupons. Coupons is a great thing. You have that kid collect coupons during the week. He gets to make decisions. He gets to look at it and see which one's really worth more. He gets to use it as a shopping list. When he goes in, he's got the picture right there. If he needs that, if he doesn't, he's focusing on other things. So, I mean, those everyday activities, doing laundry is a lesson in of itself. I can't put everything in the machine at one time. It's too heavy. It's too much. It's not going to get clean. So how do you sort it? Where do you put it? How do you do that? That becomes rote to us, but to a child, depending on their level, they need to learn those things, and that's part of education. That's part of feeling independent and understanding and measuring don't go out and get the pods, because that's cheating. You have to measure the stuff. So the more independent on everyday activities, you don't realize that's what education is. I mean, the whole reason for education is so that you become a contributing member of society, right? That's why we educate people. I don't really care if Columbus discovered America or not. Apparently he didn't. But okay, we spend our lives memorizing that. It doesn't have any meaning. It doesn't have any value if it's to my everyday life. It's interesting. But so the things that have value in your everyday life are really very educational, and all those other little skills of reading and math and all that come into it. So, I mean, that's where I would do from a parent perspective. And when my son was little, he did have some attention deficit issues and things like that. And we would just take a Lego break, for some reason he could concentrate on those. Okay, 20 minutes of Legos is a good thing, but we got to get back to work. So I always do bring them back to work. I always do bring them back to what has to be. I don't throw it out the window, but you can put it on hold. So I think that's a good thing for parents, and just being consistent. Underline. Yeah, because consistency is where it's at. If you're not consistent, they're going to find a hole in your game plan. So
that's really, I think, very realistic and practical and really good, useful advice. Before Lisa, any other comments before I ask if anybody else has any comments, and then we'll wrap this up?
Yeah, well, I mean, I love hearing what you say, Cathy. And one of the things I love is that you're just so concrete and visual and so direct without a lot of outlying theory that makes it confusing. So, it's just wonderful connecting with you again like this. But anyway, yes. And something you were talking about before, Larry, about if there's conflict as a parent, as bringing mindfulness into this, how can you do that? And two things. I think one is to be aware of the emotions coming up in dealing with conflict, and being able to take a step and say, okay, what do I feel? What is coming up for me? Is there anger? And kind of be aware of those emotions before you start talking. So I think that would be very important to do. And because we tend to have a lot of emotions when we're talking about our kids, hence the IEP meeting where everything goes out, the window. And the other thing is, one example was when Gabriel gets evaluated, and you read the report, the psych eval, and the triennial evaluation every 3 years. The last time he got it done fairly recently, and I'm reading it, I'm going, this is like the most depressing thing I've ever read, because it basically says everything he can't do. That's what it is. It's a piece of paper that says everything he's not capable of. And when we went into the meeting, I said, you know what? And that's what I told him. We had his annual meeting, and I go, this is really depressing. Can we not go over this report? Can we just talk about Gabriel, what he's good at? Can we talk about Gabriel's strengths instead of all these weaknesses? And everybody was like, okay. And that's what we did. We just spent the meeting talking about Gabriel, who Gabriel really is, instead of that report. So.
And I see someone
Thank you,
clapping.
Stacey.
I see somebody clapping in the background. Stacey, you want to say something? You have to just unmute yourself.
Sure.
Thank you.
Yeah, I have a couple of comments to circle back to some things both Peggy and Cathy were also stating, but I really want to champion and echo what Lisa said. I think that I've had the same experience. The reports talk to what we can't do. I have two sons. My older son, Jason, is 16, an honor student across the board, plays cello and guitar and things, and makes an amazing role model for his younger brother, Eric, who has high functioning autism in 7th grade, who's 13. And Eric's daily challenges are that, they're daily. But what Lisa said is so important. To pick up on a strength is the greatness of also how to teach my kid. And that's something that is so important, where Cathy was saying, hone in on the fact that he has a rote memory, and I can use that. So Eric's able to memorize facts in science and with repetition in other academic classes, But the fact that he has that memorization ability and his neurology is wired differently, he's able to really stamp those facts in his brain, has become my best ally to teach him. So I know with repetition, he can learn stuff. And I've made it really important that the teachers give me notice, including a weekend, say on a Wednesday or a Thursday, that I'll know a test coming up the following week. And that was in the standard classroom. Most of that has gone out the window with regards to distance learning, and I'm still modifying plans and kind of riding on my surfboard and learning with making strategies and changes as I go as a distance learning mom. But if I made index cards, or he uses a Quizlet, which is a common Google Classroom tool, and he studies it 10, 15, or 20 times, then we have a fighting chance of getting a great grade. So the idea behind figuring out what are the strengths of that individual child are really important. And then you're able to utilize those skills and help make those challenges more strengths. I like also the comment around the functional skills versus the academic skills, and what Cathy was saying about teaching over the summer and how to be able to really kind of figure out home skills and build independence and build confidence around things that are really important. I was so frustrated in the beginning trying to figure this all out with homeschool and isolation and Google Classroom and the layers in there. And I realized some of the academic enrichment that I came across was serving us better. We visited museums, we went to the Intrepid and learned about air, sea, and space, and we did a webinar with Mystic Aquarium. We did things with NASA, recently watching the rocket launch, things that are, like Cathy was saying, read a news article and have that conversation. Eric does, ELA is his biggest challenge. And so long passages, short stories, or even novels are very challenging for him. So I have decided we're gonna read poems. Inferencing is really hard for him. So we read short little poems and talk about the message and the meaning, and try and come up with other things that help his comprehension to become better in a short format. And I'm okay with that. And then being okay with the notion of how to accept, and this is really hard for the strong advocate in me, and everyone on this call can relate to this, how to accept the notion of regression. And he is definitely having regression because of the lack of academic, the lack of a classroom teacher not being able to deliver a lesson in the classroom setting. So he's a traditional student. He has a lack of flexibility, and some of that is because of his disability. And he needs the routine of the classroom, the period, the bell changes, and that's gone out the window. Our school is not offering math first period. We have alternating days. The educational recipe is different in every district. They've been able to offer what they think is best for them, I guess. I'm not positive who rolled that out, but Eric only gets math and science on Tuesday and Thursday right now. Social studies, ELA, and language is Monday and Wednesday. So how can you equate posting worksheets and occasionally delivering a lesson, which some teachers, of course, are rising to the occasion, and some aren't, because the district didn't standardize hosting actual lessons via the webinar. The balance of 5 days in a classroom for 42 minutes. So I've had to really embrace myself and utilize some of the tools that Lisa has given me and Peggy and you guys in that meeting that we had back in March to train the trainer and think about, well, I have to step back. I meditate more often. I'm trying to focus on what's important. I'm trying to focus on still moving him ahead, but I think that I've been able to make some peace with the idea of the enrichment components. He's great at art. He's great at science. We're doing more with that. I started ordering him from the Kiwi company They send me a science kit in a box once a month. It's like a membership. This is exciting. It's something he does with his brother. They're following directions. They're building. They're coming up with a final product. It's interesting. It's exciting. I'm following an interest of his, like Cathy had said that also earlier. Also, I want to thumbs up, Cathy, to you about how to use humor and how to build those social relationships. So if I could shout out to the new teachers coming out of college that might be interested in our messages today, to build that initial relationship is something I learned early on with the readings of Dr. Stanley Greenspan and Serena Wieder with Follow the Child's Lead, but more so with the direct interpersonal relationship and how to learn to really kind of hone in on what's important to that child. Like, for example, you said a few minutes ago, take a Lego break. For Eric, it would be having a discussion about Power Rangers and Transformers, for one example. So these things are all important, how to learn the child, how to get in there and follow the strengths. But I've been at challenge, conflict, point to self as parent and advocate to really kind of make peace with that, accepting the fact that he's going to regress, that right now I'm having to manage less is more, and how can I continue to just move him forward. I think those were the key points that really hit for me as you guys were talking. One more short comment is to ask yourself, when you're the teacher and you're working with a learner, or you're a parent working with a learner, whatever your role, whose need is it? Is it really Eric's need to learn two-step equations? No, but he's got to pass 7th grade, so we got to teach it anyway. So then we use the best teacher in the house for that here is his older brother, Jason, to help him out with it, and repetition, which I've learned is where he's got strength. So after running through those lessons 8 times, he's got a meeting later today and he needed to write down some notes about what he's learned over the past 8 weeks. And he wrote two-step equations. Wow, that was fantastic. When I came home yesterday and read that one came from him. I suggested he write down he's doing better riding his bike. Alexa, stop. And he wrote down that he conquered two-step equations. So it's all important, the academics, the functional. As a parent, I've had to figure out how to just keep him moving, whatever that pace may be, and each day is a little bit different.
Well, look, I can't listen. From the moment that we engaged with each other, I knew that you mentioned about advocate. That's your middle name.
Thank you.
It really is your middle name. I can't thank you enough for your comments. All right, so anybody else?
Well, I would just like to say to the parent, I could hear the stress in her voice every time she said regression. And you know what? It's not regression because he's doing other things. When you're moving forward, you're not always moving in one direction. You're moving forward in 2, 3, 4 directions.
Good
so
point.
The fact that, that regression that you see on paper really isn't regression. That stuff is still there. He didn't lose it, but he's doing other things. And you can sneak some of that stuff in there. I'm okay with that. But yeah, that's not regression. So I could hear the emotional stress in your voice. He's going to regress. I could tell. I know. I'm accepting that. No, he's not regressing. He knows that stuff. It didn't go away.
Right.
So especially with someone that you described that has such a good memory. Yeah, that information did not go anywhere. Throw it in every once in a while. Don't worry about it. He's progressing in so many other ways. And as far as the socialization, pull a couple of pranks. The eyeball fell out, the thing, the foam rubber, birthday cake, that kind of stuff, and send him next door with it. Because then he's got to approach somebody else with it, and that's a great thing for those kids to do. I mean, I had a box full of those because it got them to approach somebody else and be social and
Okay.
have something to say, you know. Remember what I did that? Yeah. So, yeah. So relax. He's progressing. He's just progressing differently.
Right. Thank you. Those are good
Really,
suggestions.
absolutely. Thank you. All right, so I think at this point, if there's not any other comments, we'll bring this to a close. But I'd like to bring it to a close with a statement.
One comment.
Please.
And a short
I
meditation.
I just really want to acknowledge what Cathy just said, because I think it's really kind of embodies everything. When she said, when you're moving forward, you're not necessarily moving in one direction. Was that what you said?
Yeah.
Okay. Because I think that's incredibly powerful. And that is something we should all be mindful of, not to have preconceived notions of where we should end up. You know, how to get to that point. It may be, it's going to be a more fluid way. So don't get so hooked up to saying, if I'm here, I need to be right there. So I think that's like kind of embodies everything we're doing here.
And I think you're right on with that. And I think, I'm not sure if you heard as you were starting to speak, Stacy said, and a meditation. So the fact is that, is there a possibility, which we think has been a very powerful teaching moment for all of us, that you could provide, you know, a simple exercise, a minute, a two-minute exercise, like you've done in the other school exchanges.
Yeah, and I think what I'm hearing as a recurring theme here, and I'll say it again, it's about expectations. And I think it's important to let go. I think in general, when you're meditating, a lot of it is about letting go. It's about letting go of what we think, where we should be, what we think we should be feeling, what we think. We tend to operate on like a road pattern. And I think it's so important to say, you know, take a moment and say, where are we right now? In this moment, how are we doing? In this moment, when I'm sitting here with my child and, you know, they're doing their assignment and like, yeah, this was a really great moment. Maybe that moment wasn't so great, but this moment is really good. I think that's really important. Don't harp on the ones, we tend to cling to the negative as humans. I think it's really, really important to cling to those, to say there are positives. And it's okay. Maybe yesterday wasn't perfect, but we have today. And just to go from there and move from that point. And we're learning. I think it's really important to say as parents, we are learning in this process of educating our children. You know, so don't be hard on yourself. You know, no one, you know, you're not perfect. Nobody's perfect. Just take it from there, take it from what you learned and move forward.
And is there a possibility that you could spin your wizardry and actually walk us through, like you do, about the 10% more comfortable now? Like
You
actually,
want to do, we can, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, guys, let's go. Let's do it. So I'm here and we're taking a moment to bring ourselves from rolling in our heads, you know, doing that thing, taking a breath and bringing ourselves down. Bring ourselves down to feeling our breath, feeling the moment that the air goes into our nostrils and leaves. Bring ourselves to whatever we're sitting on and taking a moment to connect. Because our bodies have the wisdom. And if we're in a situation where we feel tense, frustrated, angry, confused, take a moment to say, okay, I'm going to connect to what my body is telling me. What are the emotions? What am I feeling in my body? If I'm sitting there, if I'm working with my child and feeling upset or stressed, where is that showing up in my body? And just taking a moment, say, okay, I feel the stress building up in my shoulders. I feel the discomfort in my belly. And then taking it down, taking a breath. Trying to alleviate that stress, that tension. Taking another breath. Say, okay, I got this. I understand now that this moment is making me feel stressed. I see where the stress is in my body. And now I can purposefully relieve that tension. And now I can come back to the moment, feeling a little less stress. And saying, let's begin again. Because you can always, always begin again. Every moment we can begin again. Let go and begin again. Thank you.
Lisa, thank you. Peggy, thank you. Cathy, thank you. And I just like to leave you all with a quote that I heard one time, a statement that really applies here. It says, great teachers are immortal. You never forget a good teacher. Well, Cathy, here you are, you know. So thank you very much, everyone, and we'll see you, next week. All right, have a good week.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Be well now.